Okay guys, so welcome back again. So in this video, we'll be creating this slideshow in React using Framer Motion. So this is the demo of the application. So here, as we can see that here we have a image component here, and then we have a background color here, and then we have two buttons here, right and left. So if I click on right, we see that the image is swiped to the next image. And if we continue doing that, we get the next image as always. And if we click on the previous button, we get a reverse slide-in effect. That is, the previous image comes into the canvas, and then we can see the image here. And this can continue going on forever because it's an infinite loop. And as you see that it started again from the first image here, as we can see here. And the same goes as well if we go to the previous button, or if we click the previous button again and again. So this is all what we are going to do in this video, and all these images are taken from Unsplash here. That is, all the links of the images are taken from Unsplash. They provide royalty-free images or free usable images inside the project, inside the projects. And then we are going to use this library called Framer Motion. So this is the library which we are going to use. That is a React library for doing animations called Framer Motion. So if you want to know more about Framer Motion, then you can go to the link in the description below. And what I've done is this, that I've divided this project or this video into several steps. That is, firstly, we'll be creating the HTML skeleton. Then we'll be doing our own styling using CSS or SAS, whatever you prefer. You can use whatever you like to use. And then we'll be implementing a basic slideshow without any animations. That is, you would be having these working buttons to switch to the next and previous images. And finally, we are going to implement the animations using Framer Motion. So it depends on your understanding with Framer Motion or your understanding with HTML or CSS, that whatever you know, you can skip that part and then you can switch to the section in which you are interested in. So this is the road for the video ahead. So before diving into coding, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, do subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. And in the end, if you like the video, do hit the like button. It motivates me a lot. So let's dive into our code here. So here what I've done is this, that I've created a very basic React application using the create React app package by doing npx create React app and the name of the project here. And if we see here, the project name in our case is this slideshow tutorial, as we can see here. So here is the basic React project, and I've started this project by doing npm start like this. So it is a very simple basic React thing to start the React project using the create React app package. And we have this thing here. So firstly, what I want to do, I want to create a layout or the HTML skeleton for this project here. So as you can see here in the completed project, we have a container here, and then we have a div called slideshow, and then we have an image inside here, and then we have these two buttons. So let's do that. So it's a super simple HTML skeleton here. So firstly, what I'm going to do, I'm going to remove each and everything from the app component here. And this app component I get from the create React app package, which is rendered inside our index.js file, as we can see here. So this is nothing fancy about app.js file. And here I would like to create a div with a class of container. So let me do .container to create a div with a class of container. And now I would like to create a class called slideshow inside this div. So slideshow. And these are classes which I am naming here is only for styling purposes, to style the application. And then inside here, I want to have an image component or an image HTML thing here with a class name of slides. So I would be doing img.slides like this to give it a class name of slides, and the source we would put in a moment. But for the alt attribute, I would simply say slides. Though it doesn't matter whatever you want to call the alt attribute, but I prefer to give an alt attribute to my images here. And then after this, what we want to have a buttons here, two buttons here, one for the next button and one for the previous button. That is this previous button and this next button. So let's go back here. And here I would simply say button like this, and I would be given a class name of prev button. That is the previous button. So I would call it prev button. And in the similar way, I want to have another button called the next button. So I would call it next button. That is the class name. And for the text for the button, I would be using an emoji called right maybe. So let me select this thing here. And now for the previous button, what I would do, I would simply call it left. And then I should get the respective emoji here like this. And if I save this app.js file, we should see here that we have this thing here. So let me increase the zoom level here. So we see that we have this kind of a thing here inside our HTML layout here. And this image is broken because we haven't provided any source for the images. So let's simply copy and paste some images here. So I have an array of images, so which I would use inside this application. So let me paste in the images array here. So if you can see, these all image links are coming from Unsplash, and I would be using the images from Unsplash. So this is a basic image variable here containing an array of image sources. That is, if we go to any of the source, we would be seeing the respective image here. If I command click here, we are seeing these images here. So we are using these images here inside our application. So let me minimize it. And now what I can do, I can simply put in a source here like this. So I can say images, and let me reference only the first element of the image array here. So if I save this, we see that we have a humongous image here. And then let me zoom out, not zoom this out, but let me zoom out this thing here. So we have this image here, and then we have these two buttons here, if you can see it. So now this is all the HTML that is needed for this application. And now what I'm going to do, I'm going to style the application using the CSS file using these class names here. That is the container, slideshow, and the slides, and the previous button, and the next button. So let's do the styling for now. And if you want to skip the styling, you can simply copy the CSS file from my repo, which I would be definitely sharing, and it would be linked in the description below. So let's go to the app.css file, and let's remove all the styles that come by default inside the app.css file. Let's save this. And now what I'll do, I'll simply say colon root, and here I would simply say box sizing to be border box, and I would simply say margin to be 0 and padding to be 0. That's my style reset here, or CSS reset here. And then I would be targeting in the container class. That is this class here, that is this container class, which contains all the application logic or all the HTML elements of the application. And now here what I would do, I would simply display it as flex. So let me display it as flex, and I won't be going into details about the CSS. It is very simple CSS that I'm going to write here, and I'm going to give it a height of 100 viewport height, and I want to give it a background color. So let me use this color here. So 0f0 and c29. I'm not going to do the linear gradient as it was in this thing here. That is, it is simply a linear gradient, but I'm not going to do that linear gradient because you all can do that very easily. I'm simply providing a background color. So if we do save this, we see that we have this background color here, and that's all what we need for the container thing here. And now what I'm going to do, I'm going to target the slideshow div here. That is this div here with the class name of slideshow. So let me target that slideshow here. So dot slideshow. And here we would simply say margin to be auto, so that it is placed in the center of our container div, because the container div has a display of flex. And then we give it a width of 60 vh or 60 viewport width like this. And then I want to give it an aspect ratio of 16:9. So 16:9, and sometimes it says that I should use calc here. So calc 16:9. I hope that this should work. And then I want to position it relatively, because I want to position all these elements that is inside this slideshow div, that is this image button and this button here, to be absolutely to this slideshow container. So therefore I'm giving the slideshow position of relative here. And now I would say overflow to be hidden, and border radius to be, let's say, 16 pixels. So let me save this, and we see that now we have this this thing here. We can only say this thing here. It is all centered here. And never mind about this cutting here. I would be fixing that. So this is all what we have right now. So now let me target the buttons here, because now buttons are now not visible, and the buttons are placed absolutely to the slideshow. That is these buttons, I want to position them absolutely to the slideshow div. So let me directly target the button here. So instead of using a class, I'm directly using the HTML element called button, because in our application we have only two buttons here. So what I can do, I can say padding to be 16 pixels, font size to be 18 pixels, then the width of the button would be 64 pixels, aspect ratio would be 1, border radius to be 32 pixels. Border radius, it should be like this. A border to be none, cursor to be pointer, and text align to be center, and color to be white. That is the color of the text here. So if we save this, we still don't see our buttons here. But let me give one more thing to our buttons here, that is the on hover state of the button. So on hover, what we want to have, we want to simply change the background color to something else, and we haven't provided in a background color here. So let me provide in a background color here to our button in normal state would be this color itself. That is the color of the this color here. And now when we hover over the button, we can give it a background color of something else. So we can simply say hash 24243E like this. And now we would target the individual buttons, that is the previous button and the next button. That is, both the buttons have a class name of previous button and the next button. So let me target the previous button. So it is very simple to style this previous button to put it in the center of this slideshow div. So I can say dot prev button, and I would give it a position of absolute, top to be 50%, left to be again 16 pixels only, and then I'll simply translate it, because if I simply save this, we see that this button is not vertically centered, so we need to translate it up by 50% in the y direction. So I can simply say transform translate y -50%, and now it should be centered in the vertically in the center. It is vertically in the center. And now what I'll do, I'll simply do the same thing for the next button. So let me copy and let me paste it here. I only need to change in the left and right margins. So I can simply say right button, not the right button, but the next button. And instead of left, I should say right to be 16 pixels. So if we save this, we see that we have this button here, and we see the hover states here, if you can look at closely here. And now what I'll do, I'll target in the image element here, that is this image element, because currently we see that the image is like overflown here and we cannot see the image properly. So let's go to the app.css file, and let's copy the slide name from here, and or that class name from there. So dot slides was the class name for our image element. I would simply give it a position of absolute, top of 0, left of 0 again. Then the width would be 100%, that is the 100% of the parent container, that is the slideshow container. And again the height would be 100%, that is the height of the parent container. And we give it an object fit to be cover, that is to cover the image element. And then the object position would be center, like this. So if we save this, we have this result here, and it looks pretty similar to what we have here. So let me go to the first image here, this image here, and it looks it is similar to what we have inside our project right now, this thing here. So now that is all the CSS that you need for this application. And now what I'm going to do, I'm going to implement the button click events here. That is, if we click on this button, we should go to the previous image. And if we click on this next button, we should go to the next image inside the array. So let me close the app.css file because that is not required anymore. And now here what I'll do, I'll create on-click event handlers. But before that, I'm going to create two functions here inside our app component. So I would say function next step, that is go to the next image. It would be like this. And then we have another function called prev step. Though I could have used only a single function here, but for clarity, I am simply using two functions here to make it more explicit here. So here on click event, that is the on click event of the this previous button, I want to simply call in the prev step. So prev step like this. And if we want to go to the next image, we want to have this button click event here, and that would simply show next image, that is next step, like this. So let me save this. Nothing changes here. And now to display the image according to the step on which we are, we need to have some kind of a state variable here so that we can reference that image from the image array. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to have an index here for the image to have the image index here. So I would say use a state snippet, or I would use the user state snippet to get in the index. Set index would be 0. That is initially start from the very first image of this image array. So let me import user state from React. So it is imported at the top here. And instead of providing an images 0 here, I would simply say index here. So initially the index is 0. So this image would be again shown here. So if we save this, we have this image. And if we simply use this initial state to be 1, so it would use the first image of the images array. But let's keep it back to 0 here. And now what do we want to do? If we want to go to the next step, we simply want to set the index to be the current index plus 1. So this is GitHub Copilot that is suggesting me this thing here, but he is wrong in his own way, and we'll fix that later. But if I do this thing here, we can save this, and if I click on this button, we should be able to go to the next image. But this would fail at the very end of the very end of the index here, because we have, let's say, maybe 10 images inside our array, and if we always call index plus 1, then it would only, then if we only have 10 images, then if we call this thing here, then the index would be 11, and then there is no 11th image inside our images array. So therefore this is wrong, which GitHub Copilot suggested. So instead, what do we want to do? Firstly, we want to check, or let me stop the Copilot thing here, that is deactivate Copilot here, so that we can write our code more efficiently. So let's disable for JavaScript. So here what we want to do, we want to check that is if index is equal to images dot length minus 1. That is, if we are on the last image, then what do we want to do? We want to set the index to be the 0th index. That is, again start from the very beginning of the images array. So that's what we did here. Firstly we check that if the current index is same as the images length minus 1, that is the total number of images minus 1, then we simply set the index to be 0, and then we simply want to return from this if block, because if we don't return, then again we would be setting it to be index plus 1, and that's not what we want to do. So if we save this, and if we reload our application, we can go to next, and finally at the very end we should be again starting from index 0. And this is how this looping works for the images here. And now in the very similar way, what we can do, we can handle the preface step. So instead of simply doing set index to be index minus 1, firstly we need to check that is if we are already on the 0th index. So if index equal to 0, then we want to set the index to be images dot length minus 1, and then we want to return. Otherwise we simply want to set the image index to be index minus 1. So let's save this. And now we see that we have a full working slideshow here without animations. So now if you don't want to have animations inside your applications, you can stop watching this video. But if you want to do something like this, that is sliding in and sliding out of the images, then continue ahead with the video. And here is where frame of motion comes into effect. So up until now, we haven't used any other dependency apart from the create react app package. We see that we do not have any dependency here or any extra dependency. This is all default coming from create react app package. And now what we are going to do, we are going to stop our application and we are going to install the frame of motion dependency. So you can go to this npm page to get the dependency here, that is npm I frame of motion. So let me copy it to my clipboard and let me go back here and let me simply paste it here and let me install it. So now we have this frame of motion dependency installed, and now what I'm going to do, I'm going to close my package.json file and I'm going to again start my application by doing npm start. So let me do npm start like this. So our application should be started and we should see no change inside our application because nothing has been changed here. So let me minimize the terminal here. And now what I'm going to do, I'm going to import a couple of things from frame of motion. So I would say import motion from frame of motion, because in 99% of the cases, if you want to use frame of motion inside your application, you need to include this motion component here. And now to make this image as a motion component, because here inside the slideshow div, that is this div, only this image component is a motion component, and I would show you in a moment. So let me do it like this, that is motion.image, like this. And now this is a frame of motion component by doing motion.image, and it would be rendered as an image tag only inside our this HTML page here. It won't be rendered as motion.image, but instead it would be simply rendered as image element here and not the motion.image element. But in React, we made this as a motion component so that we can add animations to it. And now to make the animations using frame of motion, we are going to use something called variants inside frame of motion. So in variants, we can define the initial position of the image and the final position of the image, as well as when it exits out of this we can also provide properties about that exit transition. So currently, as we see that we are on this image. So if we click on this image, we go to the next image. But currently what happens is this, that the new image is immediately rendered here or immediately visible here. So what we want to do, we want to have some kind of exit animation for this image, whereas we want to have some kind of an incoming animation for this image. That is, whenever this image is present, we want to animate it from the right side and we want to exit this image to the left side. So that's what we can do using variants inside frame of motion. So we can define the variants outside this app component here. So we can say const variants equal to, so here we need to provide in the initial state, the animated state, that is the current state visible on the screen, and the exit property for this image. So we can use initial here, and again you can call this hidden, but I am simply calling it initial because that is the initial state of this image. So here we can have an object here, and then we need to provide in the animate property here, and this animate can be simply called as visible. That is, whenever this image or the incoming image is visible, to make add these properties to that image, and the initial properties are these properties. And then finally we can again have an exit property for this variant here. That is, whenever the image is exiting from this slideshow, apply these CSS properties or these transition properties. So here we have these three things here, that is the initial, animate, and exit. So initially what we want to do, we want to have an X here, that initially let the image be at 200 pixels distance whenever it is entering. And then we want to give it an opacity. So opacity would be, let's say 0. That is, initially let the opacity be 0. And then when we want to animate it onto the canvas, we want to have the X position to be 0. The opacity would be 1. And now when it exits from the screen or from the slideshow, we want to take it to -200 and the opacity to be 0, like this. Now to apply these variants inside our image component here, what we can do, we can provide a property here or a prop here called variants. So variants would be these variants here, which we just created. And now every motion component has three more props, at least three more props called animate, initial, and exit. So we can simply say animate would be equal to animate, and these are all text values here. That is these text values here, and then we can simply give it an initial value would be equal to initial, and then we have an exit value for this motion component, and that would be called exit. So let me save this. And now this thing here, that is this animate, is a prop and the value is this animate. So here I am calling it animate, initial, and exit. And if you would have used different names here, that is, if you would have called this hidden, visible, and exit, then here inside this thing here, you would have written hidden, visible, and exit. So it is simply a text value that is present here inside your variants object here. So if we reload the page, we see that initially it is animating, but if we go to the next image, we see that this is not animating. And it is because this motion component treats this whole image as a single image. To give these images different keys or different to make these images as different components, what we can do, we can simply provide in a key property here. So I can say key equal to image, let me call it image, and then we can call it index. And later on, we are going to change this index in this key value also to make the animations smoother. But for now, every image that is rendered onto our page here has a different key here, and then we can see the animations here. So if we save this, we see that we get this animation here like this. But one thing you might notice that if we press the back button, then also the images are entering from the right side. And if we go to the next thing here, we can only see the images entering from the right side, whereas we cannot see the image exit transition here, which is defined here. That is, the exiting image should have an exit property of this, that is, it should translate to negative 200 pixels with an opacity of 0, but that is not happening here. And to do that, what we need to do, we need to wrap this motion component inside one more component here that is called Animate Presence. So let me import Animate Presence from Framer Motion. And now we can wrap this motion component inside Animate Presence. So I can say animate, not cinemate, but it should be Animate Presence like this. And then we can wrap this motion component inside Animate Presence. And now if we save this, we see that as soon as we reload the page, we get this initial animation. But do you really want this? I don't want to have the initial animation here because I always want the first image to be visible here. So what I can do, I can simply say initial to be false. That is, do not apply any animations initially when the this component is rendered. So let me save this. And if I reload the page, we see that now we are not getting that initial animation for the first image. But if we go to the next image, we see that we get the next image, whereas we also get the transition for the previous image. So if we go next image, we see that we get some animations here. So let me increase the size here. So if we go to the next image, we see that we are getting some sort of a transition for the outgoing image as well as the transition for the incoming image. So this is what this Animate Presence does with this key prop here. That is this key prop here. And now we see that even if we are going back, we are getting the images enter from the right side, whereas we want to enter the image from the left side. That is, our animation or the X direction of the image entering and exiting should be depending on the button on which we click in. That is, if we click on the previous button, the image should exit out from the right side and enter from the left side. Whereas if we click on the next button here, then the image should enter from the right side and the exiting image should exit from the left side. So to fix that, what we can do, we can pass some kind of a variable here inside this variance thing here so that we can manipulate the direction accordingly. So what we can do, we can create one more state variable here inside our app component that would be called direction. So use state, and here I can simply call it direction, and initial direction would be, let's say, 0, because we don't know that whether the user is going to click the next button or the previous button. So let's start with a direction of 0. And here what I would say that if we click on the next button, the direction would be positive direction. That is, this axis, that is this side should be positive. So if we are clicking on this next button, I would be simply setting the direction value to 1. And if we are going to click on the previous button, then our direction value should be -1, that is -1. Initially it is at 0. So what we can do here, that is inside our next step, I can simply say set direction to be 1. That is, since we are going to the next step, let the direction be positive. And if we are going to, if we are clicking on the previous step, let the direction be negative, that is -1. So eventually our direction would jump between 1, -1, 1, -1, and initially only it is 0 here. So what we can do, we can provide in a custom property here inside this variance thing that we have here called direction. So let me provide that here. So every property here inside this variance object can be returned as a function here. So what we can do, we can simply use an arrow function here called direction, and then we want to return something from here, from this. Let me cut it out from here. And now what we can do, we can simply return something out from here. That is, return this property here. That is this thing here. And the same things we can, and if we save this, nothing would change here because we are not passing in the direction, or we are not using directions here. So every initial value is same, as well as for the this thing here, that is for the previous button. So what we can do, we can use the same kind of a functional return statement with this thing inside the exit prop, because we are only interested in the initial state and the exiting state, because the animating state would be not dependent on direction, because it has to be at x equal to 0 and the opacity should be 1. So instead of returning this exit thing from here, what I can do, I can again use direction here, and this would be like this, and then we can simply return this object here like this, and this is something like this. So let me keep it on different lines like this, and now we have some kind of an initial here, and then we have some kind of a direction here. But how do we pass this direction property or this variable inside this function here, inside this variance here? So it is pretty simple to do with the frame of motion. I can simply use this thing here. That is, I can simply pass in a property called custom here. So custom would be equal to direction. And whatever we pass here inside this custom prop, that is, here we are passing in direction, this custom prop would be passed in here as the prop here. And again, you can call this thing anything what you like to do. If you would like to call it here D or something like that, you can call it like that. But I'm simply calling it direction here. So if we save this, we still don't have any change inside our application if we click on the previous button or if we click on the next button. So now to use this direction inside this X thing here, what we want to have is this, that if we are clicking on this next button, our direction is positive, that is 1. Then we want the initial state of the entering image should be plus 200 pixels. So what we can say direction is greater than 0. Then we want to have the entering image coming from plus 200 pixels. Otherwise, we want to have it coming from negative 200 pixels. That is, if we click on the previous button, the direction was negative. That is, it is not greater than 0. So the image should enter from negative 200 pixels. And the same logic we can apply to this exiting transition. That is, if direction is positive, that is, the new image is entering from right side. That is, if we are clicking on this button here, next button, the exiting image should have a transition of negative 200 pixels. So that's what we have here. And otherwise, if it is negative, the exiting transition should exit to plus 200 pixels. So I can say colon 200 like this. So this is all what you need to have here. And now if we save this and if we reload our application might somewhat work, but not as we expect it to work. So let me increase the zoom level here. So let me refresh the page. So we are on the first image. So if we click on next, we see that the exiting image goes to the first image goes to the right, whereas this image enters from the first thing here. And if we click here, we see that now we are getting some kind of a similar transition that we wanted to have. But if we click on the previous button, watch what happens. This image should go to the left, this image should go to the right, and the entering image should come from the left side, whereas this won't happen here. So let me press this button here. We see that the images overlaps, and that is because this direction property that we set using this custom thing here, React doesn't know about this direction property when it is mounting and unmounting components. So if you simply want to provide in the value of this direction as per the new value set by this button here, or this button click by using the set direction thing here, you can change it inside the Animate Presence. So here if we pass in custom to be direction, that is, pass in the current value of this direction to the exiting component, so then this should work fine. So if I save this and if I reload the page, everything should be fine here. So if I click on next here, we see that we get the direction here. That is, we are going to this thing here. And if we click on the previous button, we are not getting that glitch effect. That is, firstly it enters to the exits to the left and then enters from the right. So you can try it out. So if we click here, we see that we are getting these transitions here. And if we have a look at the completed application, just one last thing to do, that is, we see that we have this kind of a transition here. Whereas inside our application, we are getting some kind of a spring animation here. So let's fix that. So to provide that animation or that transition, what we can do, we can go to this animate prop here or this animate variant here. And here we need to simply provide in some transition value here. So I can simply say transition transition like this. And here I can give an X value for the transition, and I can provide in a type here. So type would be spring. And then we have a stiffness here, and this is all like hard-coded values. You can use any of the transition values. I'm simply using a stiffness of 300 for the spring and a damping effect of, well, let's say 30. And it only simply simplifies your transition here. Basically, what you can also do, you can simply, let me comment it out and let me provide here transition. And here, maybe I can do this thing here, that is ease in. So let me save this. We see that we get some kind of an easing effect here. And the same transition you can also provide here, that is transition inside this animate prop. So I can do it like this, transition ease in. So if I do here, we see that we get some kind of a smooth animation here and not the springy animation which we were having in previously. Basically, what we have inside this application, we have some kind of a different transition value, and that is this transition value here. So let me use that transition value here, and let me comment out this transition value. And the damping was 30. I just check my repo here, and for the opacity, I want to simply give it a duration here. So let me provide in a duration here, and that should be 0.2 seconds. So let me save this. And now everything is same as was in the demo. So if I click here, we see that we are getting these transition here. And the same transition object you can also provide in the exit property here, because we also want to have some kind of a exit animation whenever the exiting is happening. So let me save this. And now if I click here, we see that we get this smooth animation here, which is the same as in this demonstration here. So we can click here, we are getting this thing here. And if you're wondering that why this animation is slow as compared to a demo, it is simply because in the demo I have used 1000, that is come in from 1000 pixels and exit out to the negative 1000 pixels. And the same thing we can do it here also, that is I can again use the values here 1000 and 1000. Just save this and let's go here. So if I click here, we see that we get the same effect as was in the demo. So you can play out with these values, and you can also like scale up the images, and it may give you a different effect. So maybe initially let the scale be, I don't know if it does work, but let me try it out. Let the scale be 0.5, and when it's like into the canvas or into the viewport, it's like scale is 1, and when it exits out, it again scales down to 0.5. So let me try out this animation. Maybe we get some different effect here. So we see that this time we get the kind of effect. So you can play out with this thing here. So guys, that's all about this video. So if you have liked the video, do hit the like button, and all the code is in the repo on GitHub, and I will share the link. So again, I'm saying that if you like the video, to hit the like button, and if you haven't subscribed the channel till now, do subscribe to the channel. So thank you, bye bye, tata, take care, and have a good day and have a great day.